Is it done? I need the report before dawn. The message appeared at 11:58 p.m. No apology. The man slumped over his desk, coffee cold beside him, his child asleep in the chair, covered only by his jacket. The doorbell rang at 12:07. He froze. Who would come at this hour? He opened the door. Cold wind rushed in. Standing there was the person who had drained him for weeks. She stood there, eyes red, voice hoarse, and what she said next would flip everything he believed. Ethan Brooks was 36 years old, a single dad who worked as a contract data analyst for one of the largest tech companies in the country. He was naturally calm and enduring, the type of person who absorbed pressure without complaint. He always put his daughter Lily first above everything else in his life. His daughter Lily was 7 years old. She was sensitive, thoughtful, and incredibly perceptive for her age. She always wrote little encouraging notes for her dad on colorful Post-it notes and hid them in his lunch bag or jacket pockets. The woman at the center of everything, Claire Beaumont, 32 years old, a self-made billionaire CEO who had built her company from nothing in just 8 years. She was decisive, demanding, perfectionist to a fault, and completely obsessed with the results at any cost. Ethan had been assigned a seemingly endless series of urgent projects back-to-back for the past 6 weeks. Emails arrived at midnight with new demands. Deadlines piled on top of deadlines with absolutely no breathing room between them. He accepted everything without complaint to keep his job secure. His health was declining rapidly, dark circles under his eyes, weight loss, constant headaches, but he couldn't risk unemployment with a daughter to support. Lily slept in his cramped office many nights. Ethan would cover her eyes with his jacket to block the harsh fluorescent lights while he worked into the early morning hours. Claire saw the perfect, detailed reports he delivered every single time. She never saw the exhausted person behind them or what it cost him to produce that quality work. One time, Ethan sent a polite email asking to push back a deadline by just 2 days because Lily had a high fever and needed to see a doctor. Claire refused coldly via email within minutes. Deadlines are non-negotiable. Make arrangements. Ethan still submitted the work on time, his hands shaking from severe sleep deprivation and stress, after taking Lily to urgent care at 3 in the morning. Christmas was rapidly approaching. Claire demanded a final comprehensive report covering all projects before dawn on Christmas Eve morning. Ethan worked through yet another night. Lily curled up in the uncomfortable office chair, wearing his jacket like a blanket because he couldn't afford to leave her home alone. At 11:58 p.m. on December 23rd, the message came through. Is it done? I need the report before dawn. Ethan's vision blurred from exhaustion. He'd barely slept more than 8 hours total in the past 3 days. He was putting the final touches on the report when the doorbell rang at exactly 12:07 a.m. Ethan startled badly. Nobody visited this late, ever, especially not to his modest apartment. He checked the peephole carefully, then opened the door cautiously. Cold December wind rushed into the small, warm apartment. Claire Beaumont stood there on his doorstep, no assistant following her, no driver waiting, no security detail. She looked completely different from the polished, powerful CEO he knew from video calls. Her expensive designer coat was wrinkled and creased. Her perfectly styled hair was messy. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying. Her voice cracked when she finally spoke. I can't go home, she said simply, vulnerably. Ethan stood frozen in the doorway, completely unsure what to do or say in this surreal situation. Can I please come in? Claire asked quietly, almost pleading. Ethan stepped aside wordlessly and let her enter his small apartment. Lily stirred from her makeshift bed in the chair, rubbing her sleepy eyes. She saw the strange, upset woman and instinctively moved closer to her father for safety. It's okay, sweetheart, Ethan said gently, kneeling down. This is Miss Beaumont. She works with Daddy. Claire looked at the little girl, then really looked around the cramped apartment. She saw it was filled with scattered reports, empty coffee cups, and the evidence of weeks of overwhelming work. She finally saw what her constant demands had created, the human cost of her perfectionism. Lily, being a kind child, picked up a small piece of paper from the cluttered table. It was one of her encouraging notes she'd written for her dad earlier. She walked over bravely and placed it on the table directly in front of the strange crying lady. The note read in careful crayon letters, "Daddy works really hard so I can be safe and happy." Claire read it slowly. Her hands started trembling uncontrollably. She looked up at Ethan with something visibly breaking in her expression. "I didn't know," she whispered, her voice catching. "I didn't see what I was doing. I didn't see you at all." Claire sat down carefully at Ethan's small, worn kitchen table, her hands still trembling slightly from whatever had brought her here. Ethan made hot cocoa in his old kettle, something he always made for Lily when she couldn't sleep or felt upset. He placed a chipped but clean mug in front of Claire without saying anything. She wrapped her cold, shaking hands around the warm cup and took a deep, shaky breath. "The board of directors pressured me today," Claire said quietly, staring into the cocoa. "They demanded I sign off on mass layoffs, hundreds of people, entire departments, right before Christmas." Ethan sat down across from her at the small table, listening carefully. "I used you as a shield," Claire continued, her voice breaking with emotion. "I kept giving you impossible, crushing deadlines because if you could somehow meet them, I could tell the board we didn't need more staff. I could prove one exceptional person was worth 10 average ones." She looked directly at him with red-rimmed eyes. "I didn't think about what it was doing to you as a human being. I didn't think about you as a person at all, just as a productivity metric on my dashboard." Ethan was quiet for a long moment, processing this admission. "Why are you here now? Why tonight?" "Because I finally actually looked at the timestamps on your submitted work," Claire said, pulling out her phone. 3 a.m., 4 a.m., 4:30 a.m. every single night for 6 straight weeks. And then I requested the surveillance footage from the office building security. She showed him the footage on her phone. It showed Ethan carrying a sleeping Lily into the office building late at night, covering her small form with his jacket, working at his computer while she slept uncomfortably in the chair beside him. "I saw what I'd done to you," Claire whispered, tears starting to fall. "And I couldn't go home to my empty 10,000 square foot penthouse and pretend I didn't know." Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway, holding a plate carefully. "I made cookies earlier today. They're a little burnt on the edges. Do you want one, Miss Claire?" Claire looked at the innocent offering. The cookies were indeed very burnt around the edges, almost black. "I'd absolutely love one," Claire said, taking the charred cookie with complete seriousness. She bit into it carefully. It was honestly terrible, hard and bitter. But she smiled anyway, genuinely. Lily giggled at Claire's expression. Ethan found himself smiling too, despite everything. Even Claire laughed, really laughed, for what felt like the first time in months, or maybe years. "Your apartment is so small," Claire said, looking around at the cramped space. "But it feels warm. It feels like a real home." "It is home," Ethan said simply. "It's all we need." Claire's eyes grew wet again. "I have a 10,000 square foot penthouse on the top floor of the most expensive building in the city. I absolutely hate being there. It's cold and empty and sterile, and I can't remember the last time I genuinely laughed in that space." She turned to face Ethan directly. "I'm sorry. I'm truly, deeply sorry. Not because it's the professionally appropriate thing to say, but because I genuinely didn't understand what I was doing to you, and I'm horrified now that I do." Ethan studied her face carefully, looking for signs of manipulation or corporate speak. He saw only real, raw remorse. "I don't need your pity or your charity," he said carefully, firmly. "I need basic respect. I need to be seen as a human being with a life and a family, not just as a resource to be exploited." "I completely understand," Claire said, nodding. "And I want to fix this properly. I'll adjust all the schedules immediately, hire additional people, implement real protections for the staff." "Words are easy," Ethan pointed out. "Actions are what actually matter." "Then watch what I do starting tomorrow," Claire replied with determination. The night passed in surprisingly comfortable silence. Claire asked about Lily, about Ethan's life, about his wife. She listened, really actively listened, for perhaps the first time in her professional life. At one point, Ethan told her about his wife Sarah passing away from cancer 3 years ago, about the overwhelming, crushing fear that Lily would grow up without a father too, because he'd literally work himself to death trying to provide for her. Claire listened with visible tears streaming down her face. I'm terrified of being exactly like my father, Claire admitted suddenly. He built a massive empire and lost his entire family in the process. Everyone left him. I swore I'd never be like him. But here I am, completely alone, driving good people into the ground for profit. You can change, Ethan said gently, if you actually want to. I do want to, Claire said with absolute certainty. I really truly do. Around 4 in the morning, complete exhaustion finally caught up with Claire. She fell asleep on Ethan's worn, comfortable couch. Lily woke up early as children do and saw Claire sleeping there. Without being asked or told, she got her favorite blanket and gently draped it over the sleeping woman. When Claire woke up an hour later, she saw the soft blanket covering her. Her eyes immediately filled with tears again. Thank you so much, Lily, she whispered to the little girl. Claire stood up to leave as dawn broke. She pulled out her business card and wrote something on the back with a pen. I have to go handle some very important things, she said to both of them. But I meant every word I said tonight. Watch what I do. After she left quietly, Ethan looked at the card she'd left behind. On the back, in her neat handwriting, it said simply, give me a chance to do this right. Please. C. The board of directors was absolutely furious when Claire announced her comprehensive new humanitarian HR restructuring plan the following week. You cannot prioritize worker comfort over profit margins, the stern chairman said coldly from the head of the table. This is a business, not a charity organization. But Claire stood her ground firmly. She hired additional qualified staff immediately. She implemented mandatory time-off policies. She created reasonable, achievable deadlines with buffer time built in. The board retaliated swiftly and viciously. They leaked carefully crafted information to business media outlets, claiming Ethan was severely incompetent and that Claire was covering for him out of inappropriate personal interest. The fabricated story went viral across social media within hours. Billionaire CEO shows favoritism to underqualified worker, read the headlines. Ethan was summoned to an emergency board meeting the next day. Lily was terrified, crying at home and asking repeatedly if Daddy was in serious trouble. Claire walked into that hostile meeting like a force of absolute nature. You want to talk about Ethan Brooks? She said, her voice ice cold and controlled. Let's talk about him properly. She pulled up detailed data analytics on the massive presentation screen. This man completed the equivalent work of 3 full departments by himself over the past 2 months. He met every impossible deadline you people demanded without complaint. His work quality exceeded every single metric we have by significant margins. She turned to face the board members directly, making eye contact with each one. And we nearly destroyed him as a human being. I nearly destroyed him. Because we treated human beings like disposable machines that don't have families or lives or basic needs. The chairman stood up aggressively. You're being overly emotional about this. This is business. No, Claire said with absolute firmness. This is basic ethics. And I'm completely done pretending there's some kind of contradiction between the two. The board presented her with a stark ultimatum that afternoon. Choose right now, profitability or your little humanitarian project. The shareholders absolutely will not tolerate both approaches. Ethan stood up from where he'd been sitting quietly in the back corner of the room. I'll resign immediately. You can keep your position and your company, Miss Beaumont. I don't want to be the reason you lose everything. Sit down, Ethan, Claire commanded gently but firmly. She turned back to face the hostile board. I choose people, she said clearly so everyone could hear. I choose doing business the right way with integrity. And if you absolutely cannot accept that, you can leave this company. The boardroom erupted in chaos. Several board members stood up simultaneously, making threats and predictions of disaster. The stock price will crash catastrophically, one warned. Major shareholders will revolt and pull their investments, said another angrily. Then let them, Claire said calmly. I'd rather build something genuinely sustainable than something profitable at absolutely any human cost. She announced the immediate creation of a comprehensive employee welfare fund with significant financial backing. She restructured entire work processes to prevent burnout systematically. She implemented strict legal protections for workers with families and dependents. The stock price did drop significantly, 15% in just 1 week. Some major shareholders did pull out their investments in protest. Claire accepted the financial risk completely. She believed deeply in the long-term vision. During the intensive investigation that followed, a middle manager named Mark was thoroughly exposed for falsifying productivity reports and creating the impossible deadlines that had crushed Ethan and many others. Mark had been deliberately trying to make his department appear extremely efficient by overworking people until they literally broke down. He was fired immediately and faced potential legal action. The media narrative shifted dramatically within days. Billionaire CEO chooses humanity over pure profit. Applications to work at Claire's company increased by 300% almost overnight. Ethan was fully and publicly vindicated. His name was cleared completely in the press. Claire found Ethan after the final tense board meeting concluded. "I came to you the wrong way that night at midnight," she said honestly, "but I didn't choose the wrong person to learn from." Ethan met her eyes steadily. "Just keep your promises. That's all I ask." "I will," Claire said with conviction. "I already am." The new schedule meant Ethan could finally go home at reasonable hours for the first time in months. For the first time since this nightmare began, he had dinner with Lily every single night. Claire started visiting their modest apartment occasionally, always bringing groceries and asking Lily to teach her how to cook simple, basic meals. "I've honestly never cooked anything in my entire life," Claire admitted one evening, managing to burn toast. "I've had professional chefs my whole life." Lily giggled and patiently showed her how to adjust the toaster settings properly. One evening, Lily asked with complete childhood innocence, "Miss Claire, do you want to stay for dinner tonight?" Claire looked at Ethan uncertainly. He nodded with a small, genuine smile. "I'd absolutely love to," Claire said warmly. She stayed. They ate simple pasta that Lily had helped make with her small hands. It was honestly the best meal Claire had eaten in years, maybe her entire life. The company's projects recovered remarkably. Productivity actually increased significantly because the team was healthier, more rested, more loyal, and genuinely motivated. During one of their now regular dinners together, Claire admitted something vulnerable. "I've been running from emotions my whole life. I thought feelings were weakness." "They're not weakness," Ethan said gently. "They're what make us human." Ethan was learning important lessons too. He was learning to say no when he genuinely needed to set healthy boundaries, to trust that he wouldn't be punished for being human. Together, they planted a small tree on Ethan's narrow balcony one Saturday afternoon, a symbol of new growth and recovery. One quiet evening, Lily asked completely out of nowhere, "Are you two going to get married?" Ethan nearly choked on his coffee. Claire's face turned bright red with embarrassment. "If we're not ready, we just wait," Ethan said carefully, recovering. Claire nodded, looking relieved. "There's no rush at all. We're just figuring things out." Lily seemed completely satisfied with that honest answer. Peace became their new routine. Real, sustainable peace that felt like home. Claire spent less and less time at her empty penthouse and more time in the cramped apartment that felt like a real home. The media coverage shifted entirely. Claire was now featured in business magazines as the CEO who chose people over profit. Other companies started adopting similar humane policies, inspired by her example. Ethan was offered promotions and positions at other firms. He turned them all down. He'd found something more valuable than a bigger paycheck. One Sunday morning, they all went to the park together. Lily ran ahead to feed the ducks. "I never thought I'd have this," Claire said softly, watching Lily laugh. "Have what?" Ethan asked. "A real family. People who want me around not because of my money or position, just because they want me." Ethan squeezed her hand. "We do want you. Very much." Claire leaned her head on his shoulder. "I spent my whole life building an empire, but this small apartment with you two feels more valuable than everything I own." They sat on the park bench watching Lily play, feeling genuinely content for the first time in years. Claire received a formal, cold invitation to return to her family's massive estate for Christmas. The invitation was impersonal and formal, like everything from her distant family. She declined immediately without hesitation or regret. One morning several weeks later, warm golden sunlight filled Ethan's small kitchen. The entire apartment smelled wonderfully of fresh coffee and pancakes cooking on the stove. Lily hung a new drawing proudly on the wall with colorful tape. It showed three people clearly: Daddy, Lily, and Miss Claire, all holding hands under a bright yellow sun. Claire touched the drawing gently with her fingertips. Her eyes filled with tears of pure joy. "Is this your family?" Ethan asked softly, coming to stand beside her. Lily nodded enthusiastically, beaming with pride. "Yes, our family. All of us together." Claire knelt down slowly to Lily's level, looking into her eyes. "If you both still need me, if you still want me here in your lives, I want to stay. Not just 4 visits, really stay. Be part of this family." Ethan smiled warmly, his eyes also glistening. "Welcome home, Claire." All three of them hugged tightly in a group embrace. It felt absolutely right. It felt complete. It felt like real family. The message was clear and powerful. Family is where you choose to be and who you choose to be with every single day. Claire sold her cold, empty penthouse within a month and bought a modest house nearby. Nothing extravagant or showy, just a real home with warmth. She kept her position as CEO but restructured absolutely everything about how the company operated. The company actually thrived under humane policies and genuine care for employees. Ethan continued his work, now as a senior analyst with reasonable hours, fair pay, and genuine respect from leadership. Lily thrived in school, no longer falling asleep in class because Daddy was finally home at night to help with homework and read bedtime stories. One peaceful evening, they all sat together on the porch of their new home, watching the beautiful sunset paint the sky in oranges and pinks. "Do you ever regret it?" Ethan asked Claire quietly, not wanting to break the peaceful moment. "Giving up the penthouse, the lifestyle, all that wealth?" Claire laughed genuinely, freely. "I didn't give up anything that mattered. I gained absolutely everything that actually counts." She looked at Lily, who was drawing contentedly in her notebook with crayons. "I thought success meant being at the top alone, but real success is being surrounded by people you love who love you back unconditionally." Ethan took her hand gently in his. "You've changed so much in such a short time." "You showed me how," Claire said with deep gratitude. "You showed me that being human isn't weakness, that needing people isn't failure, that love is the greatest success anyone can achieve." Lily looked up suddenly from her drawing, excited. "I finished. Look at this one." The drawing showed their new house with 3 figures visible in the window, all smiling happily. At the bottom, in Lily's careful, improving handwriting, it said, "My family chose each other." Claire and Ethan looked at each other, both with tears in their eyes and smiles on their faces. They had both been broken in different ways, both running from different painful things, both afraid of different watchers, but together they'd found real healing, found home, found family. Not through obligation or blood or random circumstance, but through conscious choice, through showing up every day, through choosing each other every single day. The billionaire who had everything material learned that she had nothing that truly mattered. The single dad who had nothing material learned that he had everything that truly counted. And together they built something neither could have built alone. A real family, a real home, a real life worth living and celebrating every day. The transformation was complete, not just in policies or schedules, but in hearts. Claire learned to value people over profit, to see employees as humans with families, not just productivity numbers. Ethan learned to set boundaries, to ask for help, to accept love when it was offered genuinely. Lily learned that family can grow, that love can expand, that home is where people choose to be together. They became a living example that redemption is possible, that change is real, that love transforms everything it touches. Other CEOs reached out to Claire, seeing how she'd achieved such dramatic positive results. She told them all the same thing: treat people like human beings. The rest follows naturally. The company's stock eventually recovered and then soared. Turnover dropped to almost zero. Innovation exploded. Loyalty became absolute. Treating people well wasn't just ethical, it was excellent business. But more importantly, it was simply the right thing to do. On their first Christmas together as a real family, they didn't exchange expensive gifts. Instead, they each wrote letters to each other, letters about gratitude, about love, about choosing each other. Claire's letter to Ethan said, "Thank you for showing me what really matters. Thank you for giving me a second chance. Thank you for choosing me." Ethan's letter to Claire said, "Thank you for changing. Thank you for seeing us. Thank you for staying." Lily's letter in crayon said simply, "Thank you for being my family. I love you both so much." They read the letters together, crying and laughing, holding each other tight. This was wealth. This was success. This was everything that mattered. Years later, Lily would tell people how her family came together. Not through traditional means, but through choice and love. How her dad taught a billionaire to be human again. How that billionaire became her mom. If you believe heartfelt stories about redemption, transformation, and family like this deserve to be shared with the world, please leave a thoughtful comment below and subscribe to Strong Dad Stories. We tell powerful stories that shouldn't be forgotten. Stories about real people making real changes in their lives. Stories that remind us what truly matters in this world, not wealth, power, or status, but love, family, human connection, and the courage to change when we realize we've been wrong.